The morning mist clung to the Texas prairie like a thin veil, and Jake Morrison could taste the dampness in the air as he guided his horse along the fence line. At 34, he had the weathered hands of a man who'd spent his life working the land and the quiet demeanor of someone who preferred the company of cattle to people. The sun was just beginning to pierce through the gray sky, casting long shadows across the endless stretch of grassland that bordered the old railway tracks. Jake had been riding this same route for nearly 15 years, checking the fence that separated his family's ranch from the abandoned Burlington Northern Line. The tracks hadn't seen a train in over a decade, but they still cut through the landscape like a scar, rusted rails disappearing into the horizon. It was a peaceful morning ritual, one that allowed him to think and plan his day before the ranch came alive with activity. But today was different. As he crested a small hill, something caught his eye near the tracks. At first, he thought it might be discarded trash. People sometimes dumped things along the old railway, but as he rode closer, his heart began to race. There, curled up against the embankment beside the rusty rails, was a woman, and she wasn't alone. Two small children were pressed against her sides, all three of them sleeping on what appeared to be a thin blanket. The sight stopped Jake cold. His horse, sensing his tension, snorted and pawed at the ground nervously. "Easy, girl," Jake whispered, dismounting slowly. He approached on foot, his boots crunching softly on the gravel. The woman looked to be in her late 20s, with dark hair that had escaped from what might have once been a neat ponytail. Her clothes were wrinkled and dusty, and even from a distance Jake could see the exhaustion etched in her face. The children couldn't have been more than 5 and 3 years old. The older one, a little girl with curly blonde hair, had her arm protectively wrapped around what appeared to be her younger brother. Their clothes were clean but worn, and Jake noticed a small backpack and a stuffed animal nearby. Jake's mind raced with questions. How had they gotten here? How long had they been sleeping beside the tracks? The nearest town was Miller's Creek, 15 miles away, and there wasn't another soul for miles in any direction. The temperature had dropped close to freezing the night before. They could have died out here. He knelt down carefully, not wanting to startle them. "Ma'am?" he called softly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" The woman's eyes fluttered open, and Jake found himself looking into the most beautiful brown eyes he'd ever seen, but they were filled with fear and confusion. She sat up quickly, instinctively pulling the children closer to her. "It's okay," Jake said, raising his hands to show he meant no harm. "I'm not going to hurt you. My name is Jake Morrison. I own the ranch just over that hill." He pointed toward his property. "Are you hurt? Do you need help?" The woman's eyes darted around, taking in their surroundings as if she were trying to remember how they'd gotten there. The little girl was beginning to stir, rubbing her eyes with tiny fists. The woman started, her voice hoarse. "I'm sorry. We didn't mean to trespass. We needed somewhere to sleep." She looked embarrassed and afraid, as if she expected him to be angry. "Hey, it's all right," Jake said gently. "You're not in trouble, but you must be freezing out here. When did you last eat something?" The woman's composure cracked slightly. "Yesterday morning, I think. The kids, they're hungry. I'm Sarah. This is Emma and this is Tommy." She looked down at the children, who were now both awake and staring at Jake with wide, curious eyes. Jake felt something shift inside his chest. These weren't just strangers. They were a family in need, and something had gone terribly wrong in their lives to bring them to this desolate place. He'd always been a man of few words, preferring action to conversation, and right now action was what was needed. "Well, Sarah, Emma, and Tommy," Jake said, managing a small smile, "I think the first thing we need to do is get you all somewhere warm and get some food in your bellies. My house isn't far from here. Would you like to come with me?" Sarah hesitated, and Jake could see the internal battle playing out in her expression. She was clearly desperate, but trusting a stranger, especially with her children, wasn't something she could do lightly. "I promise you're safe with me," Jake said quietly. "I've got a housekeeper, Mrs. Chen, who helps me run the place. She's been like a mother to me since my own mother passed. She'll want to help you too." Emma, the older child, tugged on her mother's sleeve. "Mama, I'm cold," she whispered. That seemed to make the decision for Sarah. She nodded slowly. "Okay, thank you. We don't have anywhere else to go." Jake helped them gather their few belongings. The backpack contained some children's clothes, a few crackers, and what looked like important documents in a Ziploc bag. As they prepared to leave, Jake noticed how Sarah moved carefully, as if she were in pain, and how she kept glancing over her shoulder as if expecting someone to appear. He lifted Tommy onto his horse first, then Emma, and finally helped Sarah up behind them. The walk back to the ranch house gave Jake time to think. Who were these people? What had brought them to sleep beside abandoned railway tracks in the middle of nowhere? And why did he feel such a strong, protective instinct toward them? The ranch house came into view as they crested the hill, a sprawling single-story building with a wraparound porch and smoke curling from the chimney. Jake had built most of it himself over the years, and it was the kind of place where a family could feel safe and welcome. As they approached, Mrs. Chen emerged from the house, drawn by the unusual sight of Jake returning with passengers. The elderly Chinese woman had worked for the Morrison family for over 20 years, and Jake knew she would ask no questions and offer nothing but kindness. "Mrs. Chen," Jake called out, "we have guests who need breakfast and a warm place to rest." Mrs. Chen's face immediately softened as she saw the children. "Of course, Mr. Jake. Bring them inside. I'll make pancakes and hot chocolate." As Jake helped Sarah and the children down from the horse, he caught Sarah's eye. "You're safe now," he said simply. "Whatever brought you here, you're safe now." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, and she nodded, unable to speak. Jake realized that this moment, finding this family beside the tracks, would change everything. He was a man who kept to himself, who preferred the quiet predictability of ranch life. But looking at Sarah and her children, he knew he couldn't just offer them a meal and send them on their way. Something told him that this quiet cowboy was about to discover that sometimes the most important things in life come to you when you least expect them, sleeping beside abandoned railway tracks in the early morning mist. The warmth of the ranch house kitchen enveloped them like a gentle embrace. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself, preparing a feast that seemed to appear from nowhere. Fluffy pancakes, scrambled eggs, crispy bacon, and steaming mugs of hot chocolate topped with marshmallows. Jake watched from the doorway as Sarah and her children sat at his kitchen table, and something about the scene felt both foreign and perfectly right. Emma and Tommy ate with the focused intensity of children who had gone too long without a proper meal. Their small hands gripped their forks tightly, and Jake noticed how Sarah encouraged them to eat slowly, her maternal instincts warring with her own obvious hunger. She picked at her food, her eyes constantly scanning the windows and the front door. "The pancakes are delicious," Sarah said to Mrs. Chen, managing a genuine smile for the first time since Jake had found her. "Thank you so much for your kindness," Mrs. Chen beamed, refilling Sarah's coffee cup. "You eat more, dear. You're too thin, and these little ones need to grow strong." She ruffled Tommy's hair affectionately, and the 3-year-old giggled, the first sound of pure joy Jake had heard from the family. Jake poured himself a cup of coffee and sat across from Sarah. In the warm light of the kitchen, he could see more clearly the toll that whatever had brought them here had taken. There were dark circles under her eyes, and her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. But there was also a strength in her posture, a determination that spoke of someone who had fought hard to protect her children. "If you don't mind me asking," Jake said carefully, "how did you end up out there? Miller's Creek is 15 miles from here, and there's no bus route or anything." Sarah's expression immediately closed off, and she glanced nervously at the children. We've been traveling. Our car broke down yesterday and we couldn't afford to fix it. We were walking to the next town when it got dark, and we needed somewhere to rest." Jake nodded, but he could sense there was much more to the story. The way she looked over her shoulder, the careful way she chose her words, the fact that she had important documents in a waterproof bag, these weren't the actions of someone whose car had simply broken down. "Where were you heading?" he asked gently. "California," Sarah said quickly. "I have a job opportunity there. In San Francisco." Emma looked up from her pancakes. "Mama, I thought we were going to see Aunt Lucy." Sarah's face flushed, and she quickly redirected her daughter's attention. "Finish your breakfast, sweetheart. We need to figure out what we're going to do next." Jake exchanged a glance with Mrs. Chen, who was pretending to busy herself with washing dishes, while obviously listening to every word. The older woman had an uncanny ability to sense when people were in real trouble, and Jake could see the concern in her eyes. "Listen," Jake said, leaning forward slightly. "I don't know what's going on, and I'm not going to pry. But you and the kids are welcome to stay here as long as you need. We've got plenty of room, and Mrs. Chen loves having people to cook for." Sarah's eyes widened. "We couldn't impose like that. You've already done so much, and we're strangers. We should probably try to get to town and do what?" Jake interrupted, not unkindly. "You said you couldn't afford to fix your car. Do you have money for a hotel? For food? For bus tickets to California?" Sarah's silence was answer enough. She looked down at her hands, shame and desperation warring in her expression. Tommy had finished his pancakes and was now playing with his stuffed rabbit, making it hop across the table. "Mama, are we staying here? I like it here. It's warm, and the nice lady makes good food. We'll see, baby, Sarah said softly, but Jake could see the tears threatening to spill over. Mrs. Chen dried her hands on her apron and sat down next to Sarah. Dear, I've been alive for 73 years and I've learned that sometimes the universe puts people exactly where they need to be. You were meant to find this place, and Mr. Jake was meant to find you. Jake wasn't usually one for talk about destiny or the universe, but looking at Sarah and her children, he found himself nodding in agreement. She's right, and honestly, this place gets pretty lonely with just the two of us rattling around. It would be nice to have some life here. Sarah looked between Jake and Mrs. Chen, and Jake could see her defenses beginning to crumble. I don't understand why you're being so kind to us. You don't know anything about us. I know you're a good mother, Jake said simply. I know you're trying to protect your kids, and I know you're running from something that scares you. That's enough for me. The words hung in the air, and Sarah's composure finally broke. Tears streamed down her face as she covered her mouth with her hand, trying to keep from sobbing in front of the children. Emma immediately climbed down from her chair and went to her mother, wrapping her small arms around Sarah's waist. Don't cry, Mama, we're okay now. Jake felt something tighten in his chest at the sight. He'd always been better with animals than people, more comfortable with the straightforward needs of cattle than the complex emotions of human beings. But something about this family called to a part of him he'd kept buried for years. Why don't I show you to the guest rooms, he said, standing up. You all look like you could use some real rest. We can talk more later. Sarah nodded gratefully, wiping her eyes. Thank you, I need to make some phone calls. Is there somewhere private I could... Of course, there's a phone in the study, and you can use my cell if you need to call long distance. Jake paused. Sarah, I meant what I said. You're safe here. Whatever you're running from, it can't reach you here. As Jake led them down the hallway toward the guest bedrooms, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's story was more complicated than a simple car breakdown. The way she'd looked at the road when they'd arrived, the careful way she'd packed those documents, the fear in her eyes, it all pointed to something much more serious. The guest wing had 2 bedrooms connected by a shared bathroom, perfect for a mother and her children. Jake showed them where everything was, how to work the shower, and where to find fresh towels and linens. I'll be outside working if you need anything, he said. Mrs. Chen will be in the kitchen most of the day and she's got better hearing than a bat, so just call out if you need something. As Jake prepared to leave, Sarah caught his arm. Jake, I want you to know that I'm not a bad person. I haven't done anything wrong. It's just complicated. Jake looked into her brown eyes and saw fear, but also honesty. I believe you, he said simply. And complicated doesn't scare me. Take your time, get some rest, and we'll figure things out as we go. As he walked back toward the kitchen, Jake heard Sarah's voice through the study door, speaking in low, urgent tones on the phone. He couldn't make out the words, but the tension in her voice was unmistakable. Whatever had brought this family to sleep beside the railway tracks, it was still very much a threat. Jake Morrison had always lived a quiet, predictable life. But as he stepped out onto his porch and looked across the vast Texas prairie, he realized that predictability was the last thing he wanted anymore. This family had awakened something in him, something he hadn't even known was sleeping, and whatever it took, he was going to make sure they had a chance at the safety and peace they so desperately needed. 3 days had passed since Jake found Sarah and her children by the railway tracks, and the ranch had taken on a different rhythm. The sound of children's laughter echoed from the porch where Emma and Tommy played with a litter of barn kittens, while Sarah helped Mrs. Chen with the laundry. From his position mending fence near the house, Jake could hear their conversations floating on the warm Texas breeze, but despite the surface normalcy, Jake had noticed things that made his unease grow stronger each day. Sarah jumped at every unexpected sound. A car backfiring, the slam of a screen door, even the whistle of the kettle. She kept the children close, never letting them wander far from the house. And most telling of all, she'd made 3 more hushed phone calls from his study, each one leaving her more agitated than the last. This morning, as Jake worked on replacing a broken fence post, he watched Sarah hanging laundry on the line. She moved with practiced efficiency, but her eyes constantly scanned the horizon, particularly the road that led to the ranch. She was waiting for something, or someone, and Jake was beginning to suspect it wasn't going to be good news. Mr. Jake! Emma came running toward him, her blonde curls bouncing with each step. Look what I found. She held up a small, smooth stone with intricate patterns. Mrs. Chen says it's a worry stone. Native Americans used to rub it when they were scared. Jake smiled, taking the stone and examining it. That's a good find, sweetheart. Did you know my great-grandmother was Cherokee? She used to tell me stories about stones like this. Emma's eyes widened with fascination. Really? Will you tell me a story? Before Jake could respond, the sound of a car engine in the distance made them both turn. A black sedan was kicking up dust as it approached the ranch at a speed that suggested urgency rather than a casual visit. Jake felt his stomach tighten as he watched Sarah freeze at the clothesline, a wet sheet still clutched in her hands. "Emma, honey, why don't you go inside and help Mrs. Chen with lunch?" Jake said, keeping his voice calm despite the tension he felt building. The little girl nodded and skipped toward the house, but Jake noticed that Sarah had already moved to intercept her daughter, scooping Emma up and carrying her inside with barely concealed panic. The sedan pulled up to the main house and stopped. Two men in suits got out, their movements deliberate and professional. Jake recognized the type immediately. Law enforcement, but not local. Federal, maybe. The kind of men who carried badges and asked questions that could change people's lives. Jake walked toward them, his hands relaxed but ready. "Can I help you, gentlemen?" The older of the two men, tall with graying hair and cold blue eyes, flashed a badge. "I'm Agent Kellerman, FBI. This is Agent Rodriguez. We're looking for Sarah Chen and her children." Jake's mind raced. Chen. That was Mrs. Chen's last name, but it was also a common Chinese surname. Was Sarah using an assumed name? "I'm Jake Morrison. This is my ranch. What's this regarding?" Agent Rodriguez, younger with sharp features and an impatient demeanor, stepped forward. "We have reason to believe that Mrs. Chen and her children are in danger. We're here to offer them protection." "What kind of danger?" Jake asked, but he was already beginning to understand. The fear in Sarah's eyes, the way she'd been constantly looking over her shoulder, the secretive phone calls. She wasn't just running from something, she was running from someone. "I'm sorry, but that's classified information," Agent Kellerman said. "We just need to know if you've seen them. A woman, late 20s, with two small children. They might be traveling on foot or in a broken-down vehicle." Jake studied both men carefully. Something about their story didn't sit right with him. If they were here to offer protection, why were they being so secretive? And why did Agent Rodriguez keep glancing toward the house as if he was planning something? "I haven't seen anyone like that," Jake said slowly. "But if I do, I'll be sure to call the local sheriff." Agent Kellerman smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "We'd appreciate if you called us directly instead. Here's my card. This is a federal matter, and it's important that we handle it properly." As Jake took the card, he noticed something that made his blood run cold. Agent Rodriguez had moved closer to the house, and through the kitchen window, Jake could see Mrs. Chen pointing toward the back of the house where the guest rooms were located. The younger agent was nodding and speaking into a small radio. "Actually," Jake said, his voice hardening, "I think you gentlemen should leave. This is private property, and you don't have a warrant." Agent Kellerman's friendly facade dropped. "Mr. Morrison, we're trying to protect a family. Don't make this more difficult than it needs to be." "Protect them from what?" Jake pressed. "You still haven't told me what kind of danger they're in." Before either agent could respond, the front door of the house burst open. Sarah emerged, dragging a suitcase with one hand and holding Tommy with the other. Emma was close behind, clutching her stuffed rabbit and looking terrified. "Sarah, wait!" Jake called out, but she was already heading for the barn. Agent Rodriguez immediately moved to intercept her, but Jake stepped into his path. "Hold on there, partner. Like I said, this is private property. Step aside, mister." "Morrison," Agent Kellerman ordered. "We're taking Mrs. Chen and her children into protective custody." "Protective custody?" Jake repeated. "Then why does she look like she's running from you?" The answer came from an unexpected source. Mrs. Chen appeared on the porch holding a shotgun that Jake knew she kept for dealing with coyotes. Her usually gentle demeanor was replaced by a steely determination that reminded Jake why he'd always respected the elderly woman. "Those are not FBI agents," Mrs. Chen said, her voice steady despite the weapon in her hands. "Real FBI agents would have called the local sheriff first. And that one," she pointed at Agent Rodriguez, "has been asking too many questions about where Sarah sleeps and whether she has any money." Jake felt everything click into place. These weren't federal agents at all. They were the people Sarah had been running from. The reason she'd been sleeping by the railway tracks with her children. The reason she'd been so afraid. "I think you gentlemen need to leave," Jake said, his voice low and dangerous. "Now." Agent Kellerman's hand moved toward his jacket, but Jake was faster. The work of a lifetime on a ranch had made him quick and strong, and he grabbed the man's wrist before he could draw whatever weapon he was reaching for. "I wouldn't do that if I were you," Jake said quietly. "Mrs. Chen is a crack shot, and I know this land better than you know your own backyard. You're outnumbered and outgunned. Agent Rodriguez had stopped his advance toward the barn, clearly recognizing that the situation had changed. "You're making a mistake, Morrison. You don't know who you're protecting." "I know enough," Jake replied. "I know she's a good mother trying to protect her children. I know she's been running from something that scared her enough to sleep outside with 2 little kids. And I know that whatever you want with her, she doesn't want any part of it." From the barn, Jake could hear the sound of a truck engine starting. Sarah had apparently found the keys to his old pickup, and she was making her escape. The sound seemed to galvanize the 2 fake agents, and they both started moving toward the barn. "That's far enough," Mrs. Chen called out, raising the shotgun to her shoulder. "First one who takes another step is going to meet his maker." Jake had to admire the old woman's courage, but he also knew that the situation was about to escalate quickly. These men weren't going to give up easily, and Sarah was about to drive into a trap with her children. The pickup truck emerged from the barn, kicking up gravel as Sarah drove it toward the main road, but Jake could see that she was heading directly into the path of the black sedan, which was blocking her escape route. "This ends now," Agent Kellerman said, pulling out his weapon despite Jake's grip on his wrist. "You can't protect her forever, Morrison. We know where she is now, and we'll keep coming until we get what we want." Jake realized that this quiet cowboy was about to be tested in ways he'd never imagined. The woman he'd found sleeping beside the railway tracks wasn't just someone in need of help. She was someone worth fighting for. And these men, whoever they really were, had just made the biggest mistake of their lives by threatening her and her children on his property. The morning sun cast long shadows across the ranch yard as the confrontation reached its boiling point. Jake Morrison had always preferred the quiet life, but sometimes a man had to stand up for what was right, no matter the cost. The standoff in the ranch yard seemed to stretch forever, tension crackling in the air like electricity before a storm. Jake could see Sarah's pickup truck idling near the barn, blocked by the black sedan, while fake agents Kellerman and Rodriguez calculated their next move. The sound of Mrs. Chen's shotgun being cocked echoed across the yard, a clear warning that the elderly woman was not bluffing. "You're making a big mistake, Morrison," Agent Kellerman said, his weapon now fully drawn. "You have no idea what you're dealing with." "Then enlighten me," Jake replied, not loosening his grip on Kellerman's wrist. "Because from where I'm standing, it looks like you're the ones who don't belong here." Before either man could respond, the pickup truck's engine roared to life again. Instead of trying to ram through the sedan, Sarah had thrown the truck into reverse and was backing up toward the house. As she got closer, Jake could see her face through the windshield, determined, scared, but no longer running. The truck came to a stop near the porch and Sarah climbed out, her hands visibly shaking. "It's okay, Jake. I'm not going to run anymore." She looked at the 2 fake agents with a mixture of fear and defiance. "You found me. Now what do you want?" Agent Rodriguez stepped forward, his weapon drawn but lowered. "Mrs. Chen, or should I say Mrs. Sarah Mitchell, we just want to talk about your late husband, about what he hid before he died." Jake felt something twist in his stomach. Sarah's husband was dead. The pieces were starting to come together, but the picture they formed was darker than he'd imagined. "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Your husband was a federal witness," Agent Kellerman said, keeping his weapon trained on Jake. "He was supposed to testify against the Moretti crime family, but he got cold feet and ran with classified information about their operations. We know he gave it to you before he died." "My husband was a good man," Sarah said, her voice growing stronger. "He was trying to protect his family from criminals, and you're no different from them." Jake's mind raced. The Moretti crime family was one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. If Sarah's husband had stolen information from them, it would explain why she'd been so afraid, why she'd been constantly looking over her shoulder. "Where is it, Sarah?" Agent Rodriguez asked, his voice taking on a menacing tone. "We know he didn't have time to destroy it. He must have given it to you or hidden it somewhere." "I don't know what you're talking about," Sarah repeated, but Jake noticed her glance toward the guest room window. It was subtle, but it was enough to confirm that she did know something. Mrs. Chen spoke up from the porch, her shotgun still trained on the fake agents. "Even if she did know something, why would she tell you? You're not real FBI agents. You're criminals just like the ones her husband was running from." Agent Kellerman's facade finally cracked completely. "You're right, old woman. We're not FBI. We work for people who want their property back, and we're not leaving without it." The admission sent a chill through Jake. These men were hired killers, sent by the Moretti family to retrieve whatever information Sarah's husband had taken. They had no intention of letting Sarah or her children live once they got what they wanted. "You made a mistake coming here," Jake said, his voice deadly quiet. "This is Texas, and we don't take kindly to threats against women and children." "The cowboy thinks he's a hero," Agent Rodriguez sneered. "You have no idea what you're up against, Morrison. We're not the only ones looking for her. There are others, and they won't be as patient as we've been." Emma and Tommy had been watching from the kitchen window, their small faces pressed against the glass. The sight of her children witnessing this confrontation seemed to break something inside Sarah. She took a step forward, her hands clenched into fists. "Stop," she said, her voice cutting through the tension. "Just stop. You want to know the truth? Fine. My husband was DEA, not a witness. He was undercover trying to bring down the Moretti organization. He died because someone betrayed him, and now you're here to finish what your bosses started." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow. Sarah's husband had been a federal agent, not a criminal. He died serving his country, trying to protect innocent people from the very criminals who were now threatening his family. "That's right," Agent Kellerman said with a cold smile. "Agent Michael Mitchell. He got too close to the truth and he paid the price. But before he died, he sent something to his wife, something that could destroy our entire operation. And you think I'm just going to hand it over to you?" Sarah asked, her voice filled with contempt. "So you can cover up his murder and continue poisoning communities with your drugs?" Jake felt a surge of pride at Sarah's courage. She was standing up to these criminals, knowing that her life and her children's lives were at stake. But he also knew that courage alone wouldn't be enough to save them. "You don't have a choice," Agent Rodriguez said, raising his weapon. "Give us what we want, or we'll tear this place apart and find it ourselves. And we won't be gentle about it." The threat against his property and his guests was the final straw for Jake. He'd been raised to respect law enforcement, but these men were criminals masquerading as agents. They'd threatened an innocent woman and her children, and they'd made the mistake of doing it on his land. "Mrs. Chen," Jake called out, never taking his eyes off the fake agents. "Remember what I taught you about the rifle in the gun cabinet?" "I remember, Mr. Jake," the elderly woman replied, her voice steady as stone. "Good, because these gentlemen are about to learn why you don't mess with a Texas rancher or his family." Jake made his move in one fluid motion, using his grip on Kellerman's wrist to spin the man around and disarm him. The weapon clattered across the gravel as Jake drove his elbow into Kellerman's ribs, sending him stumbling backward. Agent Rodriguez swung his weapon toward Jake, but the crack of Mrs. Chen's shotgun split the air. The blast sent gravel flying just inches from Rodriguez's feet, and the message was clear. The next shot wouldn't be a warning. "Drop the gun or the next one won't miss," Mrs. Chen called out, already reloading with practiced efficiency. But the confrontation was far from over. As Rodriguez hesitated, Jake noticed a dust cloud on the horizon. More vehicles were approaching fast. The fake agents had called for backup, and the situation was about to get much worse. "Sarah," Jake called out, backing toward the house while keeping his eyes on the disarmed agents. "We need to get inside now." But Sarah didn't move. She stood frozen in the yard, staring at the approaching vehicles with a look of absolute terror on her face. Jake realized that whoever was in those cars represented something even worse than the fake agents. They were the real thing, the actual criminals who had killed her husband. "Mama!" Emma's voice came from the house, high and frightened. "Mama, come inside." The sound of her daughter's voice broke Sarah's paralysis. She ran toward the house, but Jake could see that it was already too late. The approaching vehicles were closer now, and he could make out at least 3 black SUVs, probably carrying enough firepower to lay siege to the entire ranch. Jake Morrison had promised to protect this family, and he was about to discover just how far he was willing to go to keep that promise. The quiet cowboy who had found them sleeping beside the railway tracks was about to face the biggest fight of his life. The 3 black SUVs roared into the ranch yard like harbingers of death, kicking up clouds of dust that temporarily obscured Jake's view. He could hear car doors slamming and the unmistakable sound of weapons being readied. Through the dust, he caught glimpses of at least 8 men in dark suits, moving with military precision as they spread out around the property. "Get inside now!" Jake shouted to Sarah, who was still frozen in terror. He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the house where Mrs. Chen was already ushering Emma and Tommy away from the windows. As they reached the porch, a voice boomed across the yard with the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Mrs. Mitchell, this is Vincent Moretti. I think it's time we had a conversation." Sarah's face went white at the name. Jake had heard of Vincent Moretti, the younger brother of the crime family's head, known for his ruthlessness and his personal involvement in problem-solving. If he was here personally, it meant Sarah possessed something incredibly valuable to them. "There's a back way out through the basement," Mrs. Chen whispered urgently as they entered the house. "It leads to the old storm cellar near the creek. You could make it to the neighbor's place." "No," Jake said firmly, checking the locks on the front door and windows. "Running just means they'll catch us in the open. We make our stand here." Sarah clutched her children close, Tommy whimpering in her arms while Emma tried to be brave, despite the tears streaming down her face. "Jake, you don't understand. These people killed my husband. They'll kill all of us without thinking twice about it." "Then we better make sure that doesn't happen," Jake replied, moving to the gun cabinet in his study. He'd never imagined he'd need to use these weapons against anything more dangerous than coyotes, but his grandfather had taught him to always be prepared. Outside, Vincent Moretti's voice rang out again. "Mrs. Mitchell, I know you're in there. Your husband took something that belongs to my family. Return it and we'll make this quick and painless. Keep playing games and things will get unpleasant for everyone, including those children." Jake emerged from the study carrying a rifle and ammunition, his jaw set with determination. Mrs. Chen had retrieved a handgun from the kitchen. Apparently the shotgun wasn't her only line of defense. "I need to tell you something," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "The information my husband sent me, it's not just about the Moretti family's operations. It's about corrupt federal agents who've been protecting them. That's why those fake FBI agents found us so quickly. There are people in law enforcement working with these criminals." The revelation hit Jake like a cold slap. They couldn't trust anyone in authority. The local sheriff, state police, even real FBI agents, any of them could be compromised. They were truly on their own. "Where is it?" Jake asked. "The information." Sarah looked toward the guest room, hidden in Emma's stuffed rabbit. "Michael sewed it into the lining before he died. It's a flash drive with financial records, names, dates, everything needed to bring down the entire network." Jake nodded grimly. No wonder they'd been so desperate to find her. That information could destroy dozens of careers and put powerful people in prison for life. The sound of breaking glass came from the kitchen. Someone was testing their defenses. Mrs. Chen moved to cover that direction, while Jake positioned himself near the front windows. "Mrs. Mitchell," Moretti called out again, "I'm going to count to 10. If you don't come out with what we want, we're coming in. And I promise you the children won't enjoy what happens next." Emma buried her face in her mother's shoulder at the threat, while Tommy clung to his stuffed rabbit, the very toy that contained the evidence that could save them or get them all killed. 1, 2, Moretti began counting. Jake looked at Sarah, seeing the agony of an impossible choice written across her face. Give up the evidence and die, or fight and probably die anyway, but at least give her children a chance. 3, 4, there's another option, Mrs. Chen said quietly. "My nephew works for the Dallas Morning News. If we could get that information to him." 5, 6, how? Sarah asked desperately. "They've got us surrounded," Jake was thinking furiously. The ranch house sat on a small hill overlooking the creek, with about 50 yards of open ground on all sides. But there was the old irrigation tunnel that ran from the basement to the creek. Built during the drought years, it was barely wide enough for a person to crawl through, but it would provide cover. 7, 8, Sarah, can you upload that information to the internet? Email it to news stations, FBI headquarters, anyone who'll listen? If I had a computer with internet access, yes, but your computer is in the study, and that's the first place they'll look. 9, Jake made a decision that went against every protective instinct he had. "Mrs. Chen, take the children to the basement. Sarah, get that flash drive. We're going to fight our way out of this." 10, time's up! The assault began immediately. Windows exploded inward as smoke canisters came flying through, filling the house with thick, choking fog. Jake could hear boots on the porch and the back deck as Moretti's men moved to breach the house from multiple directions. Jake fired through the smoke toward the front door, the rifle's report deafeningly loud in the enclosed space. He heard a cry of pain and the sound of someone stumbling backward. Good, at least one of them was down. Sarah emerged from the guest room, clutching the stuffed rabbit and coughing from the smoke. "I've got it. This way," Mrs. Chen called from the basement door, Emma and Tommy already safely below. As they moved toward the basement, Jake heard footsteps in the kitchen. He spun and fired, and a man in a dark suit dove for cover behind the kitchen island. The answering gunfire splintered the doorframe inches from Jake's head. They made it to the basement just as the front door was kicked in. Jake slammed the basement door behind them, and shoved a heavy workbench against it, buying them precious seconds. "The tunnel entrance is behind those storage shelves," Mrs. Chen said, already moving boxes out of the way. Outside, they could hear Moretti shouting orders. "Search every room, find them." The tunnel entrance was narrow and dark, barely wide enough for an adult to crawl through. Mrs. Chen went first with Tommy, then Emma, while Sarah clutched the stuffed rabbit like a lifeline. "Go," Jake urged. "I'll hold them off as long as I can." "No," Sarah said firmly. "We stay together. You promised you'd never let go, remember?" Jake felt something warm spread through his chest, despite the danger they were in. She was right. He'd made a promise, and he intended to keep it. The sound of splintering wood came from above. They'd broken through the basement door. Jake could hear boots on the stairs. "Move!" he whispered urgently, pushing Sarah toward the tunnel. "I'm right behind you." As they crawled through the narrow passage, Jake could hear the basement being torn apart above them. Moretti's men were methodical and thorough, but they hadn't found the tunnel yet. The passage seemed to go on forever, but finally Jake saw light ahead, the creekside entrance. They emerged into the fading daylight, covered in dirt and breathing hard. "Now what?" Sarah asked, still clutching the stuffed rabbit. Jake looked back toward the house, where he could see smoke still pouring from the windows. His home, the place where 4 generations of Morrisons had lived and worked, was being destroyed by criminals. But as he looked at Sarah and her children, he realized that home wasn't just a building, it was the people you were willing to fight for. "Now we make sure your husband's sacrifice meant something," Jake said, pulling out his cell phone. "We're going to expose every single one of these bastards." The quiet cowboy who had found a family sleeping beside the railway tracks was about to become the man who brought down one of the most powerful crime syndicates in the country, and he was just getting started. 6 months later, Jake Morrison stood on the porch of his rebuilt ranch house, watching Emma and Tommy chase fireflies in the twilight. The evening air was warm and peaceful, filled with the sound of cricket songs and distant cattle lowing. It was hard to believe that this same property had been the scene of a gun battle that changed all their lives forever. The immediate aftermath of their escape had been a whirlwind of activity. Using his cell phone from their hiding spot by the creek, Jake had simultaneously called the Dallas Morning News, CNN, the FBI's corruption hotline, and every major news outlet he could think of. Sarah had uploaded the contents of the flash drive to multiple cloud storage accounts and emailed copies to journalists across the country. Within hours, the story had exploded across national media. "DEA agent's widow exposes massive corruption network" had been the headline that brought down not only the Moretti crime family, but also 17 federal agents, 3 judges, and a senator who had been taking bribes for over a decade. Vincent Moretti and his men had been arrested at Jake's ranch, caught red-handed with enough weapons and evidence to put them away for life. The fake FBI agents, Kellerman and Rodriguez, had turned state's evidence in exchange for reduced sentences, providing even more details about the corruption network. But the real victory had been quieter, more personal. It was the way Tommy had stopped having nightmares after the first month. It was how Emma had started calling Jake Papa Jake without anyone asking her to. It was the morning Sarah had woken up and realized she wasn't looking over her shoulder anymore. "Jake?" Sarah's voice came from behind him, soft and familiar. She stepped onto the porch carrying 2 cups of coffee, settling beside him on the swing he'd built last month. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jake accepted the coffee gratefully, inhaling the rich aroma. Mrs. Chen had taught Sarah how to make it exactly the way he liked it, though he suspected Sarah had been paying attention to his preferences long before the cooking lessons began. "Just thinking about how different everything is now," he said, watching Emma show Tommy how to cup his hands to catch a firefly gently. 6 months ago, I was a bachelor rancher who talked more to his cattle than to people. Now look at this place." The ranch house had been rebuilt bigger than before, with a wraparound porch and extra bedrooms. There was a swing set in the yard, children's bicycles leaning against the barn, and flower boxes under every window. Sarah's touch bringing color and life to spaces that had been purely functional before. "Do you miss it?" Sarah asked quietly. "The quiet life?" Jake turned to look at her, struck as always by how beautiful she was in the soft evening light. Her hair was longer now, no longer the desperate, tangled mess it had been when he'd found her by the railway tracks. The fear had faded from her eyes, replaced by something that made his heart race every time he saw it. "Not for a second," he said honestly. "I spent so many years thinking I was living when I was really just existing. You and the kids, you brought this place to life." Sarah smiled, the expression lighting up her entire face. "We brought each other to life." From the yard, Emma came running toward them, her small hand carefully cupped. "Mama! Papa Jake! Look what I caught!" She opened her hands to reveal a firefly, its gentle glow pulsing in her palms. Tommy followed close behind, his own hands empty but his face glowing with excitement. "I couldn't catch one," Tommy said, not sounding particularly upset about it, "but Emma showed me how they light up. They're beautiful, sweetheart," Sarah said, kneeling down to admire Emma's catch. "Now let it go so it can find its family." Emma opened her hands and the firefly drifted away, joining the dozens of others blinking across the yard like tiny stars. Jake watched the children chase after it, marveling at how resilient they'd been through everything. "I got a call from the prosecutor today," Sarah said, settling back beside Jake. "Vincent Moretti pled guilty to all charges, life without parole." Jake nodded. They'd known it was coming, but hearing it made official brought a sense of closure he hadn't realized he needed. "Good. And the others?" 17 federal agents convicted, 3 judges impeached, and Senator Williams resigned in disgrace before they could expel him. Sarah's voice carried a note of satisfaction. Michael would be proud. His sacrifice meant something. Jake reached over and took her hand, their fingers intertwining naturally. "He'd be proud of you too. The way you protected Emma and Tommy, the courage you showed, he'd be proud of the woman you became." "The woman I became because a quiet cowboy found me sleeping beside some railway tracks and refused to let go," Sarah said softly. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning and possibility. They'd been dancing around their feelings for months, both of them aware of the growing connection, but uncertain how to navigate it. Sarah was still healing from the loss of her husband, and Jake had never been good with words when it came to matters of the heart. "Sarah," Jake began, his voice rougher than usual, "I need to tell you something." She turned to face him fully, her brown eyes searching his face. "What is it?" "That first morning when I found you by the tracks, I told myself I was just helping a family in need, but it was more than that from the very beginning." Jake paused, struggling to find the right words. "You changed everything for me. Not just because you needed help, but because I fell in love with you. With all of you." Sarah's eyes filled with tears, but she was smiling. "Jake Morrison, are you telling me you love me? I'm telling you, I want to spend the rest of my life making sure you and those kids are safe and happy. I'm telling you that this ranch isn't home without you here. I'm telling you—" Jake stood up, pulling Sarah with him. "I'm telling you that I want to marry you if you'll have me." Sarah's response was to throw her arms around his neck and kiss him, a kiss that tasted like coffee and promises and the kind of love that comes from surviving the worst and choosing to build something beautiful together. "Is that a yes?" Jake asked when they finally broke apart. "That's a yes," Sarah whispered against his lips. "That's a forever yes." From the yard, Emma's voice rang out in the gathering darkness. "Mama, Papa Jake, are you kissing?" "Yes, we are," Sarah called back, laughing. "Ew!" Tommy shouted, but he was giggling too. "Get used to it, buddy," Jake replied, pulling Sarah close again. "There's going to be a lot more kissing around here." As the stars began to appear overhead, Jake Morrison reflected on the strange turns life could take. He'd been a man who valued routine and predictability, who found comfort in the endless cycle of ranch work and seasonal changes. But sometimes, the most important things in life came to you when you least expected them. Sleeping beside abandoned railway tracks in the early morning mist. He'd found them there, a desperate mother and her 2 children with nowhere left to run. But in saving them, they had saved him too. They'd given him purpose, love, and a future he'd never dared to imagine. The quiet cowboy who had found them had made a promise that morning without even realizing it. He'd promised to never let go. And as he stood on his porch with his soon-to-be wife in his arms and their children playing in the yard, Jake Morrison knew it was a promise he would keep for the rest of his life. Some stories begin with an ending, the end of safety, the end of trust, the end of the life you thought you knew. But the best stories begin with a choice, the choice to help a stranger, to stand up to evil, to love despite the risk. Jake's story had begun beside a railway track at dawn, with a woman and 2 children who needed someone to never let go. And that was exactly what he intended to do. Hold on tight, forever and always, to the family he'd found sleeping in the mist and the love that had grown from that moment of unexpected discovery. The fireflies continued their gentle dance across the Texas prairie, and somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed through the night, not a sound of departure, but of journeys completed and new adventures just beginning. 3 weeks later, on a perfect Saturday morning in October, the same ranch was buzzing with activity of a different kind. White ribbons fluttered from fence posts, and Mrs. Chen directed a small army of neighbors as they arranged folding chairs in neat rows facing an arch of wildflowers that Jake had built himself. "Papa Jake, your tie is crooked," Emma announced, appearing at his side in a yellow dress that made her look like a miniature sunflower. She had appointed herself his personal assistant for the day, taking her responsibilities very seriously. Jake knelt down so she could reach his collar, marveling at how natural it felt to have her small hands fussing over his appearance. "How do I look, sweetheart?" "Handsome," she declared with the authority of a 7-year-old. "Mama's going to be so happy." Tommy bounded over, wearing a tiny western shirt and bolo tie that matched Jake's. In his hands, he carried a small velvet pillow with 2 simple gold bands. "Is it time yet? Is it time for the wedding?" "Almost, buddy," Jake said, straightening Tommy's shirt. "Remember what we practiced? You walk slowly, don't run, and don't drop the rings." "I won't drop them," Tommy said solemnly. "Because then Mama would be sad, and you can't marry sad people." Jake laughed, scooping both children into a hug. "Where did you get so smart?" "Mrs. Chen told us," Emma said matter-of-factly. "She knows everything about weddings. She says when 2 people love each other the way you and Mama do, the whole world gets happier." The sound of a car approaching made them all turn. Sheriff Roberts was arriving with his wife, followed by the mayor of Millers Creek and several other local families who had become part of their extended community. These were the people who had rallied around them during the investigation, offering support and friendship when they needed it most. Dr. Martinez, who had helped the children process their trauma, waved from her car as she parked. Behind her, Jake spotted the familiar van of Channel 7 News. Apparently, their story had become something of a local legend, and the media couldn't resist covering the wedding of the railway track family, as they'd been dubbed. "Mr. Jake," Mrs. Chen appeared beside him, radiant in a navy blue dress with a corsage of white roses. "It's time to take your place. The bride is ready." Jake's heart hammered against his ribs as he walked to the flower arch, with the children taking their positions nearby. The small crowd of friends and neighbors settled into their seats, and suddenly, the old ranch felt transformed into something magical. Pastor Williams from the Millers Creek Methodist Church smiled and nodded at Jake. "Ready, son?" Before Jake could answer, the soft strumming of a guitar began. One of the ranch hands had volunteered to provide music. The melody was simple and sweet, and as the first notes of "At Last" drifted across the prairie, everyone turned toward the house, and there was Sarah. She walked slowly across the yard in a simple white dress that caught the morning sunlight like spun gold. Her dark hair was adorned with small wildflowers, and she carried a bouquet of the same yellow blooms that Emma wore in her hair. But it was her smile that took Jake's breath away, radiant, peaceful, and filled with a joy that seemed to light up the entire ranch. As she reached him, Jake felt the same overwhelming certainty he'd experienced that first morning by the railway tracks. This was meant to be. This family, this love, this moment, all of it was exactly as it should be. "Dearly beloved," Pastor Williams began, his voice carrying clearly across the prairie, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of Jake Morrison and Sarah Mitchell, 2 souls who found each other in the most unexpected way and discovered that sometimes the greatest adventures begin with the simplest act of kindness." Jake barely heard the words that followed. He was lost in Sarah's eyes, thinking about the journey that had brought them here. From that desperate morning beside the abandoned tracks to this perfect moment surrounded by people who had become their chosen family. When the time came for vows, Jake's voice was steady and sure. "Sarah, I promise to be your safe harbor in every storm, your companion in every adventure, and your partner in building the kind of love that lasts forever. I promise to protect and cherish Emma and Tommy as my own children, and to never ever let go of the precious gift you've given me, the gift of belonging to something bigger than myself." Sarah's own vows brought tears to everyone's eyes, including Jake's. "Jake Morrison, you found me when I was lost, protected me when I was afraid, and loved me when I thought love was impossible. You gave my children a father and gave me a future I never dared to dream. I promise to love you with the same fierce devotion you've shown us, and to build a life together that honors the miracle of how we found each other." When Pastor Williams pronounced them husband and wife, and Jake kissed his bride for the first time as her husband, the cheers that went up from their small congregation could probably be heard all the way to the railway tracks where their story began. As the celebration continued into the evening with Mrs. Chen's famous barbecue and neighbors sharing stories and laughter under the stars, Jake found himself standing in the same spot where he'd first brought Sarah and the children 6 months ago. The house looked different now, warmer, more alive, filled with the sounds of a real family. Sarah appeared beside him, her wedding dress exchanged for jeans and one of his shirts. "No regrets?" she asked, slipping her hand into his. Jake looked at his wife, and smiled. "Only one." "What's that?" "I regret that it took me 34 years to find the railway tracks that morning." Sarah laughed, the sound joining the symphony of crickets and distant cattle and children's laughter that had become the soundtrack of their life together. "Well then, Mr. Morrison, we'll just have to make sure the rest of our years together make up for lost time." And as they stood there in the Texas twilight, surrounded by the life they'd built from the ashes of tragedy and fear, Jake Morrison knew that some promises were meant to be kept forever. He'd found them sleeping beside the tracks, and he would never ever let go.